The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Enid depot, and Winifred Easton pressed her trembling hand against the worn leather seat, knowing that behind her lay a trail of shattered hopes, and ahead waited a stranger who might become her husband or her greatest mistake. The dust settled around the wheels like a curtain falling on her old life, and she steeled herself for whatever came next. It was the summer of 1893, and the Oklahoma Territory still held the raw promise of new beginnings for those brave enough or desperate enough to seek them. She had not always been desperate. 3 years ago, back in Philadelphia, Winifred had been a school teacher with prospects and a modest inheritance from her aunt. But tuberculosis had taken her brother, gambling debts had consumed what remained of the family finances, and the respectable gentleman who had courted her for 2 seasons suddenly found pressing business in Boston the moment her circumstances changed. The next suitor had proven even worse, a man twice her age with wandering hands and a reputation for cruelty toward his late wife. After that, Winifred had stopped believing in love altogether. The mail-order bride advertisement had seemed like a practical solution. Mr. Gerald Thompson of Enid, Oklahoma, sought a woman of good character and reasonable health to manage his household. The letters had been cordial but impersonal. Discussing matters of domestic arrangements and expectations, he had sent money for her passage. She had packed her belongings into 2 trunks and left Philadelphia without looking back. If love was not part of the arrangement, at least there would be security. At least there would be purpose. The driver appeared at the coach door, offering his hand. Winifred accepted it and stepped down into the afternoon heat. Enid sprawled before her, a collection of wooden buildings lining a wide dirt street. Horses stood tethered to hitching posts, their tails swishing at flies. A group of men gathered outside the saloon, their laughter carrying on the dry wind. The air smelled of dust and horses and something cooking, probably beans and bacon. "Your trunks, miss," the driver said, depositing them beside her with a grunt. "Thank you." Winifred smoothed her traveling dress and looked around, searching for a man who might match the description in Gerald Thompson's letters. Middle-aged, he had written, with dark hair graying at the temples, a prosperous merchant. "Miss Easton?" She turned toward the voice. A woman stood there, perhaps 40 years old, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her dress was simple but clean, and her face held a kind expression tempered by something that looked like pity. "Yes, I am Winifred Easton." "I am Martha Henley. I run the boarding house here in town." The woman hesitated, then continued gently. "Mr. Thompson asked me to meet you. I'm afraid there has been a change in circumstances." Winifred felt her stomach drop. Of course there had been a change. Hope was for fools, and she had been foolish enough to let a small seed of it take root during the long journey west. "He has changed his mind," she said flatly. "No, miss, he has passed away. A fever took him 3 weeks ago. It was very sudden." Martha reached out and touched her arm. "I'm so sorry. He was a good man, and I know he was looking forward to your arrival." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Winifred steadied herself, forcing her voice to remain calm. "I see. Well then, I shall need to make arrangements for my return. The next stage east does not leave until Saturday, 4 days from now. You are welcome to stay at my boarding house until then. The first 2 nights will be no charge, given the circumstances." Pride warred with practicality. Winifred had exactly $12 to her name, the remainder of what she had saved after selling her mother's jewelry. A return ticket would cost at least $20. She had no home to return to, no position waiting, no family left who would take her in. "Thank you, Mrs. Henley. I accept your kind offer." Martha picked up the smaller trunk as though reading Winifred's thoughts. "Come along, then. Let us get you settled. Things often look better after a cup of tea and a rest." They walked down the main street, passing the general store, the bank, and a building with a sign that read Dr. Samuel Morris, Physician. The boarding house sat at the corner of the second cross street, a 2-story structure with a wraparound porch and lace curtains in the windows. Inside, it smelled of beeswax and bread. Martha showed her to a small room on the second floor, simply furnished with a bed, a washstand, and a chair. "Supper is at 6. There is water in the pitcher. If you need anything, just come down and find me." Left alone, Winifred sat on the bed and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes to feel the full weight of her situation. Then she stood, washed her face, and unpacked her few belongings. She had not cried when her brother died, nor when her fortune vanished, nor when she boarded the train that carried her away from everything familiar. She would not cry now. Tears solved nothing. That evening, she joined the other boarders for supper. There were 6 in total, including herself. A railroad surveyor named Mr. Patterson, a young clerk from the land office called Henry, an older widow named Mrs. Calloway, and 2 cowboys who had just driven a herd north and were resting before heading back to Texas. One of the cowboys was a weather-beaten man of perhaps 50 who introduced himself as Chuck. The other was younger, maybe 27 or 28, with dark brown hair and gray eyes that held both intelligence and wariness. "This here is Isaac Ingram," Chuck said, clapping the younger man on the shoulder. "Best wrangler in 3 territories, though he is too modest to say so himself." Isaac nodded politely at Winifred. "Miss?" "Miss Easton has just arrived from Philadelphia," Martha explained, passing around a platter of fried chicken. "She'll be staying with us for a few days." No one asked why, and Winifred was grateful. The conversation flowed around her. Talk of cattle prices and weather and a dispute over water rights between 2 ranchers south of town. She ate quietly, observing. Isaac Ingram said little, but when he did speak, the others listened. There was a steadiness about him, a quality of competence that reminded her of her father, who had been a ship's captain before his death. After supper, Winifred helped Martha clear the dishes, needing something to do with her hands. In the kitchen, Martha worked efficiently, scraping plates and stacking them for washing. "Mr. Thompson's sister has been asking if she might meet you," Martha said. "She lives just outside town with her husband and children. She wants to apologize in person and to give you something Gerald had set aside for you." "That is not necessary." "Perhaps not, but it would mean a great deal to her. She and Gerald were close. Would you consider it?" Winifred nodded. If it would bring her comfort, then yes. The next morning, a wagon arrived driven by a sunburned man with kind eyes. He introduced himself as Robert Fletcher, Gerald Thompson's brother-in-law. Winifred climbed up beside him, and they drove out of town onto the open prairie. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass rippling like water under the wind. The sky was so vast it made her feel simultaneously insignificant and somehow free. "Gerald spoke highly of you in his letters to my wife," Robert said, guiding the horses along the rutted track. "He said you seemed like a sensible woman who understood that life is about building something solid rather than chasing rainbows." He was correct. I am sensible. My wife, on the other hand, is a romantic. She believes everyone deserves love, even old bachelors and mail-order brides. He said it gently, without mockery. I think Gerald was starting to believe her. In his last days when the fever had him, he talked about wanting to make you happy, wondering if he could. Something twisted in Winifred's chest. She had not allowed herself to think of Gerald Thompson as a real person with hopes and fears. It had been easier to keep him as an abstract figure in an abstract arrangement. The Fletcher farm appeared ahead, a neat homestead with a barn, a chicken coop, and fields of corn. 3 children played in the yard, their laughter bright as bird song. A woman emerged from the house wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 35, with Gerald Thompson's same dark hair and strong features. "Miss Easton," she said, coming forward, "I am Sarah Fletcher. Thank you for coming." They sat in the parlor drinking coffee while the children played outside. Sarah spoke of her brother, of how he had worked hard all his life, first in their father's store and then building his own business. He had always been shy around women, more comfortable with ledgers than with people. When their parents died, he had cared for Sarah until she married. He had deserved happiness. "He left instructions with his lawyer," Sarah said finally. "He wanted you to have his savings if anything happened to him before the wedding. It is $300. Winifred nearly dropped her coffee cup. "I cannot accept that. I barely knew him. We were not married. But he wanted you to have it. He said in his will that he had taken you from your home and work with promises, And if those promises could not be kept through no fault of your own, you deserved compensation to start again. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. Please, let him do this one kind thing. Let him take care of you even though he is gone. The money would change everything. It would give Winifred choices, time to decide her future, instead of being forced by desperation. It felt wrong to accept it, yet refusing would dishonor Gerald Thompson's final wishes. Then I accept, with gratitude, she said quietly. Your brother was a good man. On the drive back to town, Robert was silent for a long while. Then he said, There are not many single women in the territory. You could stay, find work perhaps. Martha mentioned you were a teacher. The school here has a teacher already, Mr. Henderson. I met him at breakfast this morning. True, but there are other towns, other opportunities. The territory is growing fast. Women with education are needed. He glanced at her. I mention it only because going back east might not be the fresh start you are looking for. Sometimes moving forward means continuing in the direction you were already heading, just on a different path than you expected. His words stayed with her as the wagon rolled through the grasslands. The sky was cloudless, an endless blue that seemed to promise something she could not quite name. A hawk circled overhead, riding the wind currents with effortless grace. The land felt alive in a way Philadelphia never had, as though anything could happen here, good or bad, triumph or disaster, all depending on choice and chance and courage. That evening, she inquired at the land office about teaching positions in the territory. The young clerk, Henry, was enthusiastic in his response. There were schools in many of the small towns, often desperate for qualified teachers. Most paid poorly, and the conditions could be rough. But for someone willing to work hard, there were opportunities. There's a place called Stillwater about 60 miles north, Henry said, spreading a map on the counter. They have been advertising for a teacher since spring. The town is newer than Enid, still finding its feet but growing steady. I could send a telegram if you're interested. Winifred studied the map, her finger tracing the distance. 60 miles. Not so far, really. Not compared to the distance she had already traveled. Yes, she decided, please send the telegram. Over the next 2 days, she waited for a response and tried to imagine her future. The boarding house had become oddly comfortable. Martha was kind without being intrusive, and the other guests had accepted her presence without asking difficult questions. The widow, Mrs. Calloway, had lived in Oklahoma Territory for 15 years and told stories of the land rush, of people racing across the prairie to claim their plots of future. There was a wildness to the tales that both frightened and thrilled Winifred. Isaac Ingram remained mostly silent during these conversations, but Winifred noticed him watching her sometimes, his gray eyes thoughtful. On the third evening, she found him on the porch after supper, sitting in one of the rocking chairs and looking out at the street as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "May I sit?" she asked. He gestured to the other chair. Free country. They rocked in silence for a moment. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Children's voices carried on the evening air. "Chuck tells me you're from Philadelphia," Isaac said finally. "Yes, and you are from Texas?" "Originally, I've been working ranches all over for the past 10 years. Go where the work is." "That must be a difficult life, always moving." He shrugged. "It suits me. No ties, no expectations, just me and the horses and the trail." "Do you never want something more permanent? A home?" Isaac was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "I had a home once, a wife too, briefly. She died in childbirth, her and the baby both. That was 7 years ago in San Antonio. I've not wanted permanence since then. It hurts too much when it gets taken away." "I am sorry," Winifred said softly. "Life is hard out here. People die. You survive, or you do not." He turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "But you know that already, do not you? Martha told me about Thompson, about why you came here." "Yes." "Yet you are not running back east." "There is nothing to run back to." "That is not the same as having something to run toward." His words struck something deep inside her. Winifred had been thinking of her future as a series of necessary steps, practical choices made to ensure survival. But Isaac was right. There was a difference between fleeing and seeking, between enduring and living. "Perhaps I'm learning to run towards something," she said. "I have inquired about a teaching position in Stillwater." Stillwater is a decent place, raw but honest. The kind of town that will give you a fair shake if you're willing to work hard. "Is any place in this territory not raw?" Isaac smiled, a rare expression that softened his weathered features. "That is the beauty of it, Miss Easton. Everything here is being built right now, including people's futures. You can become whoever you choose to be. The past does not matter as much as what you do next." The telegram arrived the following morning. The school board in Stillwater would be pleased to interview her for the teaching position. They could offer room and board plus $30 a month. If she was interested, she should arrive as soon as possible, as the fall term would begin in 6 weeks. Winifred read the telegram 3 times, then walked to the land office to inquire about transportation to Stillwater. Henry informed her that there was no regular stage service, but freight wagons made the journey regularly. He could ask around for someone traveling north who might take a passenger. "There is also the possibility of purchasing a horse," he added, "though I do not know if you ride." "I do, actually. My father insisted I learn." It had been years, but she remembered. Her father had believed women should be capable of managing independently, a progressive view that had frustrated her more traditional mother. The idea appealed to her. A horse would give her freedom to move, to leave if Stillwater did not work out, to explore. With Gerald Thompson's money, she could afford it. She spent the afternoon at the livery stable, where the owner, a grizzled man named Pete, showed her several horses. Most were too spirited for someone who had not ridden in years, or too old to be reliable. Then he brought out a bay mare with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. "This here is Rosie," Pete said. "She is about 8 years old, steady as they come. Previous owner was a minister who passed away last month. His widow cannot keep her, needs the money. I will sell her to you for $40, and that includes a decent saddle and bridle." Winifred approached the mare slowly, letting Rosie sniff her hand. The horse nickered softly, her breath warm against Winifred's palm. Something about the animal's gentle presence soothed a tightness in her chest she had not even realized was there. "I will take her." Back at the boarding house, she told Martha of her decision. The older woman nodded approvingly. "You are braver than you know, dear. Not many women would travel alone to an unknown town to start over." "I am not brave. I am simply out of other options." "Sometimes those amount to the same thing." Martha patted her hand. "You will need supplies for the journey. It is a good 2 days' ride to Stillwater. Come with me to the general store and we will make a list." As they walked down the street, they passed Isaac Ingram leading his horse from the livery. He tipped his hat to them, and Winifred found herself hoping she might see him again before she left. There was something about his quiet presence that had begun to matter to her, though she could not quite explain why. That evening at supper, Chuck announced that he was heading back to Texas the next morning. Isaac, however, would be staying in the area for a while longer, having been hired by a local rancher to help break some horses. "Robert Fletcher needs someone who knows what they're doing with that wild Mustang stallion he bought," Chuck explained. "Isaac here is the only man I know who could gentle that beast without breaking its spirit." After the meal, Winifred worked up her courage and approached Isaac as he prepared to leave. "I wanted to thank you for our conversation last evening. It helped me see things more clearly." "I am glad." He hesitated, then asked, "When do you leave for Stillwater?" "The day after tomorrow. I purchased a horse today." "You ride?" "I used to. It has been some years." Isaac frowned slightly. 2 days alone on the trail is dangerous for anyone, especially someone out of practice. There are still outlaws in these parts, and the occasional desperate man who would not think twice about robbing a woman traveling alone. I have little choice. There is no stage, and I cannot wait indefinitely for a freight wagon heading north. I could escort you. The words came out quickly, as though he had to say them before he changed his mind. The Fletcher place is on the way, and I'm not expected there until next week. It would be no trouble. Winifred studied him carefully. His offer seemed genuine, without ulterior motive. She had learned to read men's intentions over the years, and Isaac Ingram struck her as honorable despite his rough exterior. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Ingram. Thank you." "Isaac, out here, formality is more trouble than it is worth." "Then you must call me Winifred." They agreed to leave at dawn in 2 days' time, giving Winifred a chance to prepare properly and test Rosie's temperament. The next day she rode the mare around the outskirts of town, reacquainting herself with the rhythm of horseback. Her muscles protested, but the skills returned quickly, muscle memory overriding the years of disuse. She spent the evening organizing her supplies into saddlebags, keeping everything essential, and leaving the rest to be shipped to Stillwater when she sent for it. Her life was condensing down to what could fit in 2 bags and a bedroll. There was something liberating about it. Martha helped her pack dried meat, hardtack, coffee, and other trail necessities. "Isaac Ingram is a good man," she said as they worked. "Quiet, keeps to himself, but decent all the way through. His wife's death changed him, made him harder, but the goodness is still there underneath. He is simply being kind, helping a stranger." Martha gave her a knowing look. "Perhaps. Or perhaps he sees something in you that reminds him there are reasons to stop running from the past." Winifred did not know how to respond to that, so she focused on tying her bedroll with meticulous care. They departed Enid just as the sun was breaking over the horizon, painting the prairie in shades of rose and gold. Isaac rode a rangy buckskin gelding that moved with the easy grace of a well-trained cow horse. He had an extra rifle in a scabbard and a revolver on his hip, precautions that reminded Winifred this was not a pleasure ride through a park. The first few hours passed in comfortable silence. The land rolled gently, covered in tall grass that whispered secrets to the wind. They saw antelope in the distance and once a coyote that watched them pass with yellow eyes before melting back into the landscape. The sky was enormous, a blue dome unmarred by buildings or trees, making Winifred feel both exposed and oddly protected, as though the openness itself was a kind of shelter. Around midday they stopped to rest the horses and eat. Isaac chose a spot near a small creek lined with cottonwoods, one of the few clusters of trees they had seen. While the horses drank and grazed, they sat in the shade and shared the lunch Martha had packed. "You sit a horse well," Isaac observed. "Your father taught you properly. He believed women should be capable of taking care of themselves. My mother thought it unladylike, but my father prevailed." Winifred smiled at the memory. He was a sea captain, accustomed to making decisions and having them obeyed. "Was? He died when I was 17. A storm off the Carolina coast. My mother followed him 2 years later. I think she died as much from missing him as from the influenza." Isaac nodded slowly. "Some people are like that. They find the person who completes them, and without that person, they are only half alive." "Did you feel that way when your wife died?" The question was too personal, she realized immediately, but Isaac did not seem offended. He chewed thoughtfully, staring out at the prairie. "Yes and no," he said finally. "I loved Anna, but we had only been married 8 months when she died. I was devastated, angry at God and fate and myself. But I do not know if I felt incomplete without her. Maybe we had not been together long enough for that. What I felt was cheated, like life had promised something and then snatched it away before I could barely taste it. So you started moving, never staying anywhere long enough to risk that kind of loss again." "Something like that." He looked at her directly. "What about you? Martha said you were a mail order bride, which means you were willing to marry a stranger for security. That does not sound like someone who believes in love." "I believed in it once when I was young and foolish. Life taught me better." "What happened?" Winifred found herself telling him things she had never spoken aloud before. About the suitor who disappeared when her money vanished. About the older man with cruel eyes who saw her as property to be acquired. About the slow erosion of hope until all that remained was the determination to survive with dignity intact. "I decided that security was more valuable than romance, she concluded. Gerald Thompson seemed like a reasonable man who wanted a practical partnership. That was enough. But he died before you could settle for reasonable. Yes. Maybe that was fate giving you a second chance to want more than just enough. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Winifred broke off a piece of hardtack, not meeting his eyes. What if wanting more just leads to more disappointment? What if it does not? They rode on as the sun climbed higher, the heat pressing down like a physical weight. Isaac pointed out landmarks, teaching her to read the land the way he did. That cluster of rocks meant a spring nearby. Those particular plants indicated water close to the surface. The way the grass bent showed the prevailing wind direction, important for predicting weather. As evening approached, they made camp in a small depression that would hide their fire from distant eyes. Isaac was efficient, unsaddling the horses and setting them to graze on long tethers while Winifred gathered dry grass for tinder. They worked together wordlessly, each doing their part, and there was an ease to it that surprised her. Over a simple meal of beans and coffee, Isaac told her about his years on the trail. The time he helped drive 2,000 head of cattle from South Texas to Montana, a journey that took 4 months and nearly killed him twice. The blizzard in Wyoming that had him trapped in a line shack for 5 days with nothing but matches and determination keeping him from freezing. The crooked trail boss he had punched for abusing the horses, losing a good job but gaining peace of mind. His stories painted a picture of a hard life but not a bitter one. For all his talk of not wanting ties, Isaac clearly loved the work, the challenge of it, the raw honesty of animals and land and weather. "Do you never get lonely?" Winifred asked. "Sometimes. Then I remind myself that lonely is better than heartbroken." "Are you so certain those are the only two options?" Isaac stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. "No, but I have not found a third option yet." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down. The night sky was spectacular, stars scattered across the blackness like diamond dust. Winifred had never seen so many stars, never realized how much the city lights had hidden from her. Out here, the universe revealed itself in all its vast indifference and terrible beauty. "I should sleep," she said finally. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Isaac had already spread out his bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. "I am a light sleeper. If anything approaches camp, I will know." She believed him. There was a watchfulness to Isaac even in repose, a man accustomed to trusting no one and nothing to keep him safe but himself. Winifred lay in her own bedroll, exhaustion pulling at her, but sleep was slow to come. She found herself thinking about fate and chance, about the strange series of events that had brought her to this moment. If her finances had not collapsed, if Gerald Thompson had not died, if Isaac Ingram had not been staying at the same boarding house, her life would be entirely different. She would likely be married now to a man she did not love, making the best of a passionless arrangement. Instead, she was sleeping under the stars, traveling to an unknown town with a man who understood loss and loneliness as intimately as she did. It should have felt frightening. Instead, it felt like possibility. The sun woke her, warm on her face. Isaac already had coffee brewing and was checking the horse's hooves for stones. He glanced over as she emerged from her bedroll. "Sleep well?" "Surprisingly, yes. The earth makes a better bed than most people expect." He handed her a tin cup of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. "We should make still water by late afternoon if we keep a steady pace." They rode through the morning as the land gradually changed, becoming slightly more wooded with occasional small hills. They passed a farm where children played in the yard, and a woman hung laundry on a line. The scene was so normal, so domestic, that it made Winifred's heart ache with a longing she had thought she had suppressed. Around noon, they spotted riders in the distance. Isaac's posture changed immediately, becoming alert, his hand moving closer to his rifle. "Probably just cowboys," he said quietly. "But stay close, and let me do the talking if they approach." The riders angled toward them, 3 men on horseback. As they drew nearer, Winifred could see they were young, maybe 20 or so, with the dusty, worn look of ranch hands. But something about them set her nerves on edge. Their eyes were hard, assessing. "Afternoon?" the lead rider called out, pulling his horse to a stop. "Where you folks headed?" "Stillwater," Isaac replied evenly. "Just passing through?" "That is a fair distance. You traveling alone with a lady?" The young man grinned, but there was nothing friendly in it. "That seems mighty trusting of you." "The lady is my wife," Isaac said, his voice flat and cold. "We are heading to our new homestead. If you will excuse us, we would like to reach town before dark." Winifred felt a flash of surprise at the lie, but she kept her expression neutral, understanding instinctively that Isaac was trying to protect her from unwanted attention. The three riders exchanged glances. Finally, the leader nodded. "Safe travels, then." They rode past, but Winifred could feel their eyes on her back. Isaac kept riding at the same steady pace, giving no indication of concern, but his jaw was tight. "Why did you say I was your wife?" Winifred asked once the men were out of earshot. "Because unmarried women traveling with men who are not relatives attract the wrong kind of speculation. As far as anyone in Stillwater needs to know, we are married. It will make your life easier, at least until you are settled and established in the community." "You would lie for my reputation?" "I would do what is necessary to keep you safe. Out here, reputation matters. A woman alone is vulnerable. A married woman has some protection, even if her husband is not around." The practicality of it made sense, but Winifred found herself wondering what it would be like if the lie were truth. If Isaac Ingram actually were her husband, if they truly were riding toward a homestead they would build together. The thought should have seemed absurd after such brief acquaintance, but instead it felt almost natural, as though some part of her recognized something in him that fit. They reached Stillwater as the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. The town was smaller than Enid, rawer, with fewer than 24 buildings clustered around a main street. But there was an energy to it, a sense of optimism and determination. People were building something here, creating a community from nothing but will and wood. Isaac asked directions to the school, and they found it on the edge of town, a simple one-room building next to a small house that presumably served as the teacher's residence. A man was sweeping the porch, tall and thin with graying hair. He looked up as they approached. "Can I help you folks?" "I am Winifred Easton," she said, dismounting. "I am here about the teaching position. I sent a telegram." The man's face brightened. "Miss Easton, we received your telegram. I am Reverend Thomas Mills, head of the school board. We are delighted you made the journey." He glanced at Isaac. "And you are?" "Isaac Ingram. I escorted Miss Easton from Enid. I will be heading to the Fletcher Ranch nearby for work." "Ah, you must be the horsebreaker Robert mentioned. Welcome to Stillwater." The Reverend turned his attention back to Winifred. "Please, come inside. We can discuss the position, and I will show you the teacher's quarters." Isaac hesitated, then said, "I should find the livery, get the horses settled." "The livery is 2 buildings down on the left," Reverend Mills said. "You are welcome to return once you have done so. I am sure Miss Easton would appreciate a familiar face for supper." The tour of the school and house was brief. The school was what she expected, one room with benches, a blackboard, and a wood stove. The house was tiny, just 2 rooms but clean and adequately furnished. It was more than sufficient for a woman alone. Reverend Mills explained that the school served children from town and the surrounding farms ages 6 to 14. The term ran from September through May, with breaks for planting and harvest. The board would provide her salary, firewood, and a small budget for books and supplies. In return, she was expected to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and scripture. "The position is yours if you want it," he concluded. "We have been without a proper teacher since spring, and the children are suffering for it. You come with excellent references, and clearly you are a woman of courage to travel such a distance on the strength of a telegram." Winifred accepted, feeling both relief and trepidation. This was real now. She was committed to staying in Oklahoma Territory, building a life in this raw, uncertain place. When Isaac returned, the Reverend's wife had set out a simple supper: Mrs. Mills was a plump, cheerful woman who chattered about the town and its residents, filling Winifred in on who was who and what was what. The doctor was competent, but drank too much. The banker was honest, but stingy. The general store owner, Mr. Walsh, was a widower who would certainly come calling once he learned a new unmarried woman had arrived. "Though I suppose that is not a concern," Mrs. Mills said, glancing between Winifred and Isaac with poorly concealed curiosity. "Are you two engaged, if you do not mind my asking?" Winifred opened her mouth, but Isaac spoke first. "Not formally, but we have an understanding." After supper, Isaac walked Winifred back to the small teacher's house. The evening was cooling, a breeze rustling the leaves of the cottonwood tree that shaded the building. "Why did you tell her we had an understanding?" Winifred asked. "For the same reason I told those writers you were my wife, protection. A woman with marriage prospects is less likely to be bothered by unwanted attention." He paused, then added, "Unless you object to the deception." "No, it is practical. But it seems unfair to you, to have people assume you are spoken for when you are not." Isaac shrugged. "I am not looking for anyone, so it does not matter. And it will not be forever. Once you're established here, we can let it be known we decided not to suit after all. No harm done." They stood in the growing darkness, neither quite ready to part. Winifred realized with some surprise that she would miss him, this quiet man who had appeared in her life so briefly, but who had somehow become important. "When do you leave for the Fletcher Ranch?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. It is about a 3-hour ride from here." "Will I see you again?" "Do you want to?" The question was direct, typical of Isaac's way of speaking. Winifred appreciated the honesty even as it left her exposed. "Yes," she admitted. "I would like that." "Then you will." "I will be working at the Fletcher place for at least a month. I can ride into town from time to time, make sure you are settling in all right." "I would appreciate that." Isaac tipped his hat, his gray eyes soft in the dim light. "Good night, Winifred." "Good night, Isaac." She watched him walk back toward the center of town where the small hotel was, then turned and entered her new home. It smelled of wood and dust and possibility. She lit a lamp and looked around, trying to imagine herself living here, teaching here, making a life here. It did not feel quite real yet, but perhaps that was normal. Perhaps all new beginnings felt this way, suspended between past and future, belonging fully to neither. The next weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The school term would not begin for another 3 weeks, giving Winifred time to organize the classroom, review her teaching materials, and meet the families whose children would be her students. The town slowly revealed itself to her. The shopkeepers were friendly, the families welcoming if somewhat reserved with newcomers. She attended church on Sundays and helped Mrs. Mills with various community projects, aware that her integration into the town depended on demonstrating her value and character. Isaac rode into town once a week, usually on Saturday afternoons. He would stop by the school and they would walk together, sometimes just around town, sometimes out onto the prairie where they could watch the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her more about his years on the trail, and she shared memories of her childhood in Philadelphia, of her parents and her brother, of the life she had left behind. There was no courtship in the traditional sense, no formal declarations or dramatic gestures. Instead, there was a slow-growing comfort, a sense of companionship that deepened with each conversation. Winifred found herself looking forward to Saturdays with an anticipation that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with the way Isaac looked at her, as though she were someone worth seeing. One Saturday in late August, Isaac arrived with news. "I finished the work at the Fletcher place. Robert is pleased with how the stallion turned out. I am heading back to Texas next week, signed on with a big outfit driving cattle to Kansas." Winifred felt her stomach drop. "I see." They were standing by the creek that ran south of town, watching minnows dart in the shallows. Isaac picked up a stone and skipped it across the water, watching the ripples spread. "Or I could stay," he said quietly. "There is work around here, enough to keep me busy. Ranch work, breaking horses, odd jobs. It would not pay as well as trail driving, but it would be enough to live on. Why would you stay? Winifred asked, even though she knew the answer, needed to hear him say it. Isaac turned to face her fully. Because somewhere between Enid and here, I stopped running from the past. Because when I think about the trail, about moving from place to place with no ties, it does not feel like freedom anymore. It feels like missing out on something important. And what is that something? You. The word hung in the air between them, simple and profound. Winifred felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling, the walls she had built around her heart proving less sturdy than she had believed. I gave up on love, she said. Her voice barely above a whisper. I decided it was not worth the risk. I know. I made the same decision. Isaac stepped closer, his gray eyes intense. But maybe we were both wrong. Maybe the risk is worth it when you find the right person. And you think I am the right person. I think you are brave and strong and honest. I think you see the world clearly without becoming bitter about what you see. I think when I am with you, I remember what it feels like to hope. He reached out, gently taking her hand. And I think I'm falling in love with you, Winifred Easton, which scares me more than anything has in years. Winifred felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. For the first time since she could remember, hope bloomed in her chest, fragile and bright. I am scared too, she admitted, but I think I'm falling in love with you as well. Isaac smiled, that rare expression that transformed his face, and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, feeling the strength of him, the solidity. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, as though he feared she might pull away. But Winifred leaned into the kiss, into him, letting herself feel everything she had denied for so long. When they finally separated, both were breathing hard. Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I do not have much to offer you, he said. No land, no house, just a horse and my skills, and the promise that I will work as hard as I can to build something for us. That is more than enough. Winifred cupped his face in her hands. We will build it together. They sat by the creek until the sun set, making plans. Isaac would find work in the area, and they would court properly, giving the town time to see them together so their eventual marriage would surprise no one. Winifred would teach through the school year, and in the summer they would marry. It was practical and sensible, but beneath the practicality ran a current of emotion that made everything feel new. The next months were among the happiest of Winifred's life. Teaching filled her days with purpose and challenge. The children were eager to learn, hungry for the knowledge and opportunities education could provide. She taught them reading and mathematics, but also tried to teach them to think, to question, to see possibilities beyond the hard lives their parents lived. Isaac found work at various ranches in the area, building a reputation as a reliable hand who knew horses better than most men knew their own families. He spent Saturday nights in town, staying at the hotel, and Sundays belonged to them. They attended church together, had dinner with various families, and took long walks where they talked about their dreams and fears. The town accepted them as a couple, and Winifred found herself welcomed into the community not just as the teacher but as Isaac's intended bride. The women shared recipes and advice. The men invited Isaac to play cards and discuss livestock. They were building not just a relationship but a life, roots going down into the Oklahoma soil. Winter came, harsh and cold. The schoolhouse was difficult to heat, and some days Winifred taught while wearing her coat and gloves, her breath visible in the air. But the children came anyway, trudging through snow because they valued what she offered. Their determination moved her, reminded her why she had chosen this path. Isaac proposed on Christmas Eve. They were alone in the schoolhouse, decorating a small tree for the Christmas program the next day. He went down on one knee, holding out a simple gold band. I know we already have an understanding, he said, but I want to do this properly. Winifred Easton, will you marry me? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and they held each other in the lamplight surrounded by paper decorations and the scent of pine, making promises that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with love. They were married in June, just after the school term ended. The wedding was held in the church, with most of the town in attendance. Sarah Fletcher came with her family, crying happy tears and telling Winifred that Gerald would be pleased to know his death had led to something beautiful. Martha Henley traveled from Enid to attend, bringing a quilt she had sewn as a gift. Winifred wore a simple white dress she had made herself, and Isaac wore a new suit that made him look uncomfortable but handsome. Reverend Mills performed the ceremony, and when Isaac kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held in the churchyard, tables laden with food the families had contributed. There was music and dancing, children running wild with excitement, and a sense of celebration that had as much to do with the community's joy as the couple's happiness. As the sun set, Isaac pulled Winifred aside, leading her away from the crowd to the edge of the gathering where they could see the prairie stretching endlessly before them. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I thought possible." She leaned against him, feeling his arm come around her. "I came west giving up on love, certain that the best I could hope for was security and purpose. Instead, I found everything I had stopped believing in." "We both did," Isaac said. "I spent 7 years running from the possibility of this, convinced that safety lay in never caring again. But you taught me that real safety is not in protecting yourself from loss. It is in finding someone worth the risk." They stood together as the sky darkened and stars emerged, neither needing to say more. The past was behind them, all its disappointments and heartaches leading them to this moment, this place, this love. Isaac had purchased a small plot of land 5 miles outside Stillwater, and over the summer they built a cabin together. It was hard work, grueling in the heat, but they labored side by side, shaping their future with their own hands. By the time the school term started again in September, the cabin was finished. Simple but solid, with a bedroom and a main room that served as kitchen and living space both. Winifred taught during the school year, and Isaac worked various ranches, breaking horses, and training young stock. In the evenings, they came together in their cabin, sharing meals and conversation, and the quiet intimacy of 2 people building a life. They learned each other's rhythms, the way Isaac needed silence after a hard day while Winifred needed to talk through her thoughts, the way she woke with the sun while he was slow to rise, the 1,000 small accommodations that transformed 2 individuals into a partnership. The first winter in their own home was harsh, temperatures dropping below zero and snow piling high around the cabin. They spent long evenings by the fire, Isaac carving small figures from wood while Winifred read aloud from books or worked on lesson plans. Sometimes they simply sat together in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. In the spring, Winifred discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She remembered too well Isaac's first wife dead in childbirth, and saw the fear in his eyes when she told him. "We will get through this," she promised him. "I am strong, and Dr. Morris is competent. We will be careful." Isaac held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "I cannot lose you," he whispered. "I survived it once, but I could not survive it again." "You will not lose me," Winifred said fiercely. "We have fought too hard for this life to let fear win now." She continued teaching through the fall, finally stopping when her pregnancy became too advanced. The town women rallied around her, sharing advice and supplies, preparing her for what was to come. Mrs. Mills had birthed 7 children and became Winifred's primary source of information and reassurance. The baby came in December during a snowstorm, forcing Dr. Morris to stay at the cabin for 2 days until the weather cleared. The labor was long and difficult, testing Winifred's strength and resolve. But when the baby finally arrived, a healthy boy with strong lungs and his father's gray eyes, all the pain faded in the face of overwhelming love. They named him Daniel, after Winifred's father. Isaac held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face, all his carefully maintained defenses crumbling in the face of this tiny, perfect human they had created. "Thank you," he whispered to Winifred as she rested in their bed, exhausted but radiant. "Thank you for giving me back my future." Motherhood transformed Winifred in ways she had not anticipated. The fierce protectiveness she felt for Daniel, the overwhelming love that made her chest ache, the way time seemed to simultaneously speed up and slow down as she watched him grow. She had thought teaching fulfilled her need for purpose, but this was different, deeper, a connection that went beyond thought to something primal and profound. Isaac proved to be an attentive father, surprising himself with his tenderness toward the baby. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving animals into the wood. He sang lullabies in a surprisingly pleasant voice. Old cowboy songs turned gentle. He walked the floor with Daniel when the baby was colicky, patient, and steady, providing the security Winifred needed to rest. When the school year started again in September, Winifred made the difficult decision to step down from teaching. The school board understood, hiring a young man fresh from teachers' college in the East. Winifred focused on raising Daniel and managing the home, but she did not give up teaching entirely. She started a small Sunday school class, teaching the youngest children their letters and numbers, giving the older students books to borrow and discussing them when they returned. The years passed, marked by seasons and growth. Daniel learned to walk, to talk, to ride a horse while sitting in front of his father. They added a room to the cabin, then a barn. Isaac's reputation as a horse trainer grew, and soon he had more work than he could manage alone. He hired a young man named Thomas to help, teaching him the patient, gentle methods that earned Isaac such success. When Daniel was 3, Winifred became pregnant again. This time the fear was less, replaced by confidence born of experience. She gave birth to a daughter in the spring, a tiny girl with Winifred's dark hair and Isaac's solemn expression. They named her Margaret, after Isaac's mother. Life settled into a rhythm, the hard early years giving way to something more established. Isaac and Thomas started a proper horse training business, building a reputation that brought clients from all over the territory. Winifred continued teaching informally, never charging but always available to any child who wanted to learn. The community valued them both, seeing them as pillars of the growing town. Stillwater itself was changing, growing from a raw frontier settlement into a proper town. The railroad arrived, bringing more people and commerce. New businesses opened, including a real school building with 2 classrooms. The Reverend Mills approached Winifred about returning to formal teaching, but she declined. Her priorities had shifted, and she was content with that. On their 10th anniversary, Isaac and Winifred took a rare evening alone, leaving the children with Martha Henley, who had moved to Stillwater to be near them. They rode out to the spot where Isaac had proposed, dismounting to watch the sunset paint the prairie in familiar colors. "Do you ever regret it?" Isaac asked. "Giving up teaching, the independence you had?" Winifred considered the question seriously, as she always did. "No," she said finally. "I loved teaching, and I am glad I had those years. But this life we have built together, this family, it fills me in ways teaching never quite could. I found purpose in the classroom, but I found joy here, with you and the children." "I thought I would spend my life alone," Isaac admitted, "convinced myself it was what I wanted, what I deserved. Then you stepped off that stage in Enid, and everything changed. You made me believe in second chances." "We gave each other second chances," Winifred corrected gently. "I had given up on love, remember, decided it was a fairy tale for fools. But you showed me that love is not a fairy tale. It is a choice, made every day to show up and do the work and care for someone beyond yourself." They stood together as the sky darkened. 2 people who had found each other against the odds, who had built something lasting from the rubble of their previous disappointments. The prairie wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of grass and distance, of possibility and home. Daniel grew into a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father did. By the time he was 10, he was helping Isaac with the training, showing a natural gift for understanding the animals' minds. Margaret was more outgoing, with a quick wit and a stubborn streak that reminded everyone of her mother. She learned to ride before she could properly walk, fearless in a way that terrified and delighted her parents equally. 2 more children followed, another boy they named Samuel and a girl called Grace. The cabin expanded again, becoming a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a real kitchen. The horse training business thrived, and Isaac hired 2 more men to help. They built a reputation for quality that drew clients from as far as Kansas and Texas. Winifred's informal teaching expanded as well. The new school teacher was young and overwhelmed, and Winifred found herself mentoring her, sharing lesson plans and strategies. She started a lending library from her own collection, storing books in the church basement and letting anyone borrow them. She taught adult literacy classes in the evenings, helping immigrants and former slaves learn to read and write. Oklahoma Territory became a state in 1907, and Stillwater celebrated with a festival that lasted 3 days. Isaac and Winifred watched their children run wild with the other town kids, marveling at how much had changed since that day 14 years earlier when Winifred had arrived expecting to interview for a teaching job, and instead had found the life she had stopped dreaming was possible. "You know what I realized?" Winifred said, as they watched fireworks explode over the town. "I used to think finding love was about meeting someone who fit into the life you had already planned. But real love is about finding someone to build an entirely new life with, something neither of you could have created alone." Isaac pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. Wise words from the woman who gave up on love. "I did not give up on love," Winifred corrected with a smile. "Love gave up on me first. But then a cowboy with gray eyes and a broken heart showed me that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you were not looking for." They had not had an easy life. There were lean years when cattle prices dropped and clients were scarce. There were illnesses that terrified them, watching their children burn with fever and praying through long nights. There was a fire that destroyed the barn, requiring months of rebuilding. There were disagreements and frustrations, moments when they struggled to understand each other, when the differences in their backgrounds and experiences created friction. But through it all, they had the foundation they had built together, the commitment they had made not just on their wedding day, but every day since. They had learned that love was not a feeling that appeared and disappeared mysteriously. It was a decision, an action, something you did rather than something you felt. As the years passed, their children grew and began their own lives. Daniel took over the horse training business when Isaac's back began giving him trouble. He married a ranch owner's daughter and gave Winifred and Isaac 3 grandchildren. Margaret became a teacher herself, moving to Oklahoma City to work at a school for girls. Samuel joined the Army, serving with distinction before returning to work at the bank in Stillwater. Grace surprised everyone by becoming a veterinarian, one of the first women in Oklahoma to do so, studying at a college in Kansas before returning home to practice. Isaac and Winifred grew old together, their faces weathering like the prairie itself, their love deepening with each passing year. They still took evening walks when Isaac's joints allowed, still sat together on their porch watching the sunset, still found joy in each other's presence. On their 40th anniversary, their children organized a party that brought together friends from across the state. The church was packed with people whose lives they had touched, students Winifred had taught, horses Isaac had trained that had gone on to remarkable careers, families they had helped through hard times. Reverend Mills, now retired but still sharp as ever, gave a speech about how Isaac and Winifred embodied the best of what the frontier had promised, the chance to reinvent yourself, to build something meaningful from nothing, to create a legacy that mattered. But the moment that stayed with Winifred came later, when she and Isaac were alone again in their house. They sat in the rocking chairs he had built 30 years earlier, holding hands, comfortable in the silence. "Do you remember the day we met?" Isaac asked. "You stepping off that stage, looking so determined and sad at the same time?" "I remember thinking the West was enormous and terrifying, and that I had made a terrible mistake coming here. And now? Now I cannot imagine having lived anywhere else, having built a life with anyone else." Winifred squeezed his hand. I came west as a mail-order bride who had given up on love. But you found it for me, Isaac. You showed me what it could be. We found it together, he corrected gently, and you were just as responsible for teaching me to hope again. They rocked in silence, two people who had shared 4 decades of life, who had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, who had raised children and built a business and served their community. They had not had a perfect life, but they had had a good one, a meaningful one built on the foundation of love they had discovered when neither was looking for it. Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, with Winifred holding his hand. The whole town came to his funeral, sharing stories of his kindness, his skill with horses, his quiet strength. Winifred stood with her children and grandchildren, grief heavy in her chest, but gratitude equally present. She had been blessed to love him, to be loved by him, to build a life that mattered. She lived 3 more years, remaining active in the community, teaching Sunday school until the week before she died. Her grandchildren remembered her as a source of stories and wisdom, a woman who had lived through extraordinary changes yet remained grounded in what mattered most: love, family, service. On her last day, surrounded by her children in the house she and Isaac had built, Winifred spoke of him with perfect clarity. "I thought love was a luxury I could not afford," she told them, "but your father taught me it was a necessity, the thing that made everything else worthwhile. Do not make the mistake I almost made of protecting yourself from hurt by closing yourself off from love. Take the risk. Choose the joy. Build something beautiful, even when you are scared." She passed quietly that night, and they buried her next to Isaac under the cottonwood trees at the edge of town. Her great-grandchildren, who had never known the woman who gave up on love before finding it again, would tell their own children about the teacher from Philadelphia who came west and discovered that the wildest frontier was the human heart, and that the greatest adventure was learning to trust it again. The house still stood decades later, occupied by Daniel's grandson, the horse training business still operating under the Ingram name. The library Winifred started became a proper town library, with her name on a plaque by the door. The Sunday school program she pioneered continued, teaching new generations of children their letters and the values of community and compassion. But perhaps the most enduring legacy was the story itself, told and retold through the years, of how 2 broken people found each other in the vast emptiness of the Oklahoma prairie and built something lasting. It became a reminder that giving up on hope is never the answer, that second chances exist for those brave enough to accept them, and that love, when it finally comes, is worth every moment of doubt and fear that came before. The mail-order bride had given up on finding love, but the cowboy found it for her instead. And in finding it for her, he found it for himself as well. And together they created a life that proved love was not just a fairy tale or a foolish dream, but the most real and important thing in the world.